A mountain road soaked in fog at dusk. No guardrails, no witnesses, and a pregnant woman trapped in a wheelchair while the man she trusted pushes her into the void. A scream tears through the fog. "Help me!" That sound was meant to die in the mountains, but it doesn't. It reaches two unexpected ears. Two Hells Angels bikers cut their engines, hear the terror, and stop. What follows is a raw struggle against the cold, the blood, and time as they descend to save a life that was supposed to disappear. This is betrayal at its darkest. Rescue from the least expected place, and a brutal chain of justice ignited by a single cry. Leave a comment below so we can talk about it. The mountain road narrows until it feels less like a road and more like a thin scar cut into the stone. A strip of asphalt suspended between the fog and the void, with no guardrails or warning signs, only the faint white line at the edge and the sudden absence beyond. The evening oppresses, the light dims minute by minute, and the fog thickens into a moving wall that swallows sound and distance, making the world feel smaller and more dangerous at the same time. Sarah Miller, 7 months pregnant, sits in her wheelchair near the edge, the rubber tires inches from the precipice. Her posture is rigid, her shoulders raised, her hands squeezed so tightly around the armrests that her fingers ache. She can feel the cold through the metal frame, a chill that climbs up her arms and settles deep in her chest. Her breathing is shallow, careful, as if inhaling too much air could unbalance something. She doesn't look down. She keeps her eyes on the fog ahead, because the thought of the depth below tightens her stomach and quickens her heart. The road is silent. No engines, no voices. Only the faint whisper of the wind sliding over the rock and the soft hiss of moisture clinging to the stone. Behind her, footsteps approach and stop, close enough that she can feel the presence without turning her head. The smell of a familiar cologne reaches her first, followed by the sound of hands settling onto the push handles of the wheelchair. The metal creaks under the pressure, a small sound that pierces the silence and tenses her. She knows those hands, knows their weight, their warmth, the way they habitually guide her forward. At her side, just beyond the edge of her vision, another figure remains motionless. The Mistress, Tiffany, doesn't pace or fidget. She stands with her feet firmly planted on the asphalt, her arms relaxed, her gaze fixed on the chair as if observing a task about to be completed. There are no screams, no dramatic arguments, no frenzied struggle. The moment is disturbingly quiet. Sarah speaks first, her voice low and controlled, asking why they stopped here, asking if they are turning around. The fog absorbs her words. No one answers. The silence stretches, heavy and deliberate. Her husband, Mark, shifts his weight behind her. She feels it through the handles, a subtle shift that makes his grip tighten. The wheelchair moves forward a fraction of an inch. It is enough for her body to perceive the danger before her mind fully understands it. A surge of panic floods her chest. She inhales sharply and begins to turn her head, but the movement comes too late. The push is sudden and forceful, driven not by rage, but by intent. Both hands shove forward at once, using his full body weight, and the wheelchair launches toward the edge. The front wheels lift, scraping loudly against the asphalt, and for a single suspended heartbeat, the chair teeters, balanced between the road and the void. Time seems to slow down, stretching that instant until every detail is burned into her consciousness. The swirling fog in front, the faint outline of the road disappearing behind, the stillness of the woman standing by them, watching. Then gravity claims the chair. The wheelchair tilts forward and disappears over the edge, dragging her with it. Metal strikes against rock with a violent crash that echoes down the slope, sharp and brutal, a sound that feels too loud for the silent mountain. The chair flips, the frame twists, and the wheels spin uselessly in the air. Her body pitches forward sharply as the safety strap snaps, and she is thrown hard against the stone. Pain explodes in her shoulder and shoots down her spine, stealing her breath in a suffocating rush. She hits again, her hip, her back, her ribs slamming against the jagged rock, while the chair continues to fall without her, bouncing and crashing further down until it disappears into the fog below. She lands on a narrow ledge, her body bent awkwardly, her legs trapped at a wrong angle beneath her. For a moment, there is no air in her lungs. Her vision blurs, dark spots blooming at the edges. The cold seeps through her clothes and into her skin. When she finally drags air back into her chest, it comes with a scream that tears her throat, raw and instinctive, louder than she knew it could be. "Help me!" The words are released without thinking, driven by terror and pain, launched upward into the fog. She tries to move, tries to sit up, and a bolt of agony pierces her legs, sharp enough to make her scream again. Her stomach tightens violently, a deep internal pressure that makes her gasp and clutch her belly with trembling hands. Fear floods her, thick and suffocating, as she presses her palms against her abdomen, begging her body to stay still, begging the child inside her to hold on. Above her, through the shifting fog, she can barely distinguish the darker shapes at the edge of the road. She screams again, louder, desperate. "Help me, please!" The sound echoes back thin and distorted, but she keeps screaming because silence feels like surrender. On the road above, Mark pulls away from the edge, his face bloodless, his jaw tight. He looks down once, the fog rising and falling like breath between him and the ledge below. The screams reach him, clear enough to tense his shoulders. Beside him, Tiffany remains serene. She doesn't rush or shout. She watches as the fog swallows the space where the wheelchair fell, her lips pressed tight, her breathing fast but controlled. She murmurs that no one drives this road at this hour, that the fog hides everything, that it will look like an accident if anyone ever asks. Her words are quiet, practical, and fall heavily. He hesitates, uncertainty flickering on his face. Then he turns away from the edge, takes a step back, then another, increasing the distance between him and the sound of Sarah's voice. The wails from below continue, sharp and pleading, piercing the fog. He flinches with each one, then forces himself to keep walking. Tiffany takes his arm, her grip firm, and guides him toward the car. They don't argue. They don't look back. The engine starts, a sharp, grating sound in the silence, and the tires crunch over the gravel as they drive away. Within moments, the car disappears into the fog, leaving only the wind and the fading echo of a woman screaming for her life. Below, Sarah lies trapped on the narrow ledge, her body trembling uncontrollably. Pain radiates through her back and legs, but the fear is worse, a cold certainty spreading through her chest. Her legs feel heavy and distant, unresponsive when she tries to move them. Another wave of pressure seizes her stomach, and she sobs, clutching her belly with both hands, whispering pleas she cannot stop. The fog thickens around her, damp and cold, and the light continues to drain from the sky. She forces herself to scream again, pouring every ounce of remaining strength into the sound. "Help me!" The word tears her throat, but she repeats it over and over because it's all she has left. Her voice bounces off the stone and up the slope toward the empty road above, disappearing into the fog. She doesn't know if anyone will hear her. She only knows the pain, the cold, and the terrifying truth that the push that sent her over the edge was meant to be final. The wheelchair didn't stop when she did. It continued its violent descent, a blur of metal and spinning rubber, slamming into the stone again and again as it fell further down the slope, each impact echoing through the fog like a hammer striking hollow steel. She hears it even after her own body crashed onto the narrow ledge. She hears the chair rattle and break until the sound fades into nothing, swallowed by distance and fog. The silence that follows is worse than the noise. It presses against her ears, broken only by her own ragged breathing and the frantic beat of her heart. Pain radiates through her body in sharp, disorienting bursts, making it impossible to tell where one injury ends and another begins. Her shoulder burns, her back throbs, and her legs feel twisted and wrong, as if they no longer belong to her. She tries to lift her knees and cannot. The effort sends a blinding sting of agony through her hips and down her thighs, and she screams despite herself, the sound raw and unfiltered. The cold air rushes over her skin, damp and biting, bringing the smell of wet rock and moss. She blinks hard, fighting the dizziness that threatens to pull her under, and forces herself to focus. She is alive. The thought comes with a surge of disbelief, followed immediately by terror. Alive, but trapped. Alive, but bleeding. Alive, with a child inside her who depends on her staying that way. She presses her palms against the stone on either side of her, trying to steady herself, and feels grit and moisture under her fingers. Her hands tremble uncontrollably. Another wave of pressure tightens in her abdomen, deeper and more insistent than before, and she gasps, curling forward instinctively. The sensation is unfamiliar and terrifying, a stabbing pain that feels like nothing she has known before. Panic floods her chest. She whispers to her belly, broken fragments of comfort spilling out between sobs, telling the baby to hold on, telling herself not to pass out. She knows enough to understand what the pain could mean. Trauma, shock, the possibility of premature labor. The knowledge tightens her throat until it seems impossible to swallow. She forces herself to breathe slowly, shallow breaths that scrape her lungs, counting them in her head so as not to lose control. Around her, the fog thickens, descending further, curling around the ledge like a living thing. The sky above darkens even more as the afternoon slides into night. The light fades until the world becomes a blur of gray and shadow. She looks toward the road, desperately searching for any sign of movement, any shape that could mean someone is still there. She sees nothing but fog. The screams she heard moments ago echo faintly in her memory, reminders that she didn't imagine what happened, that she wasn't pushed by accident. Her husband was behind her. His hands were on the chair. The push was real. The realization hits her with a new wave of shock, colder than the stone beneath her. She tries to scream again, and her voice cracks almost immediately. "Help me!" The words scrape painfully against her throat, thin and strained, but she repeats them anyway, forcing the sound upward into the fog. She stops to listen, her heart pounding, hoping for an answer. There is nothing, only the distant whisper of the wind and the faint drip of water somewhere above. She swallows with difficulty and screams again, louder this time, pouring every ounce of strength she has left into the sound. "Help me! Please!" The words bounce off the rock wall and return to her distorted and hollow, as if the mountain itself were mocking her desperation. Tears blur her vision, hot against the cold air, running down her cheeks and disappearing into her hair. She wipes her face with trembling fingers and immediately regrets the movement as pain burns in her shoulder again. She cannot stay here. The thought repeats over and over in her mind, urgent and relentless. If she stays, The cold will steal her strength. The bleeding will worsen. The pain in her belly will not stop. She scans the ledge, searching for options, her mind racing even as her body protests. The rock ledge is narrow, irregular, barely wide enough for her body. Below her, the slope drops abruptly into darkness. Above her, the rock wall rises sharply, slick with moisture, impossible to climb in her condition. She is trapped between heights and depths, suspended in a space that offers no escape. Another contraction seizes her abdomen, stronger than the last, and she screams, clutching herself and swaying slightly despite the pain. The fear sharpens into something almost unbearable. She thinks of the car driving away, the sound of the engine fading into the fog, the deliberate calm on the face of the woman who stood by her and watched. The betrayal burns hotter than the pain. They didn't hesitate. They didn't argue. They didn't panic. They pushed her, and they left her to die. The clarity of that truth hardened something inside her, cutting through the haze of shock. She cannot afford to give up. She cannot afford to be quiet. Silence is what they want. Silence is how this ends. She forces herself to scream again, ignoring how her throat burns, ignoring how each cry seems to exhaust a part of her strength. "Help me!" The sound is hoarse now, rough, but it carries. She clings to that idea. That sound carries differently in the mountains, that echoes travel in strange ways, that someone, somewhere, might hear her. She can't know if it's true, but believing it is the only thing keeping her upright. Her body starts to shake harder, an uncontrollable chill that makes her teeth chatter. She hugs herself as best she can, trying to conserve heat, trying not to fall into the hazy exhaustion creeping around the edges of her mind. Time stretches, losing its shape. Minutes feel like hours. Each breath feels heavier than the last. She clumsily checks herself for injuries, wincing as her fingers brush sensitive spots, sticky with blood. The sight makes her dizzy as she remembers what blood loss can mean. She presses her hand against the worst of the wound, applying pressure as she was taught. Counting again, forcing herself to stay present. Another scream escapes her, part pain, part defiance. She will not disappear in silence. Above her, invisible through the fog, the road lies empty. The place where her life changed, reduced to a strip of wet asphalt, fading into the gray. Below her, the broken wheelchair rests somewhere out of sight, a twisted reminder of how quickly safety can be destroyed. Between them, on the narrow ledge, she fights to stay conscious, to stay alive, to keep making noise in a world that seems determined to swallow her whole. She screams again, the sound torn but fierce, sending it upward with everything she has left. Because as long as her voice exists, so does the possibility that someone will hear it. Minutes stretch and distort until time feels like something slippery and unstable, something she can no longer measure with clocks or light, only with pain and breath. The fog thickens around the ledge, pressing closer, muffling sound, blurring the edges of the world. Her screams echo less now, swallowed faster, as if the mountain itself were getting tired of hearing her. She tries to scream again, and the sound that comes out is hoarse and broken, barely louder than a whisper, and fear floods her as she realizes her voice is failing. She swallows hard, forcing air into her lungs, wishing her throat would cooperate, because silence feels like the first step toward disappearing. The cold is relentless, crawling under her clothes, seeping into her muscles, making her tremble so violently that her teeth chatter out of control. Each tremor sends new jolts of pain through her body, and she gasps, curling in on herself despite the agony. Her hands are numb now, her fingers stiff and clumsy as she tries to maintain pressure on the places that hurt most. The stone beneath her feels slippery, unforgiving, and she is painfully aware of how little space separates her from the fall below. One wrong move could make her slip, and the thought locks her muscles in place, trapping her in a posture that becomes more painful every minute. Another wave of pressure tightens deep in her abdomen, stronger than the last, and this time, it steals her breath completely. She screams, the sound sharp and frightened, clutching her belly with both hands, as if she could physically hold it all together. Her mind races, fear spiraling, as she tries to remember what she knows, what she's been told, what these sensations could mean. Trauma can trigger premature labor. Shock can make it worse. Blood loss can become dangerous quickly. The facts crowd her head in fragments, each more terrifying than the last. She whispers to the baby again, her voice shaky, promising a safety she doesn't know how to give, promising that help is on the way, even though she can't see it. She counts her breaths, then the seconds between the cramps, trying to impose some order on the chaos, trying to stay conscious. Dizziness washes over her in waves, making the fog seem thicker. The world tilts and sways. She closes her eyes tight and opens them again, terrified of what might happen if she leaves them closed too long. She listens desperately for any sound that doesn't belong to the mountain. An engine. Footsteps. Voices. There is nothing. Only wind. Only the faint drip of water somewhere above, each drop landing with a hollow thud that feels like a mockery. Her heart beats loudly in her ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. She wonders how long she has been here. 5 minutes? 10? More? Time refuses to make sense. The sky above the fog darkens, the gray turning toward blue, then toward black, and dread coils tighter in her chest as she realizes night is approaching. Darkness will make it harder to see her, harder to find her, harder for anyone to help her, even if they hear her. The thought sharpens her fear into something fierce and urgent. She cannot afford to fade silently into the cold. She cannot let the night take her without a fight. She forces herself to scream again, dragging the sound from somewhere deep in her chest. "Help me!" The words tear her throat, but she keeps repeating them, over and over, refusing to stop even when her voice cracks and splinters. Each scream costs her. It leaves her weaker, but stopping feels worse. Stopping feels final. She moves slightly, trying to find a position that hurts less, and the movement sends a burning pain through her back and down her legs. She bites back a sob. Tears fall freely now, mixing with the cold moisture on her skin. Her thoughts drift, unbidden, toward the road above, toward the moment before the push, toward the calm that came just before everything fell apart. She sees his hands on the chair. She sees the other woman standing there, watching. The memory ignites a surge of anger that cuts through her fear, hot and bright. They thought she would disappear. They thought the mountain would erase her. The rage gives her strength, just enough to scream again, louder than before, thrusting the sound upward with all she has left. Her body begins to feel heavy, leaden, as exhaustion seeps into her bones. The shaking worsens, turning into violent spasms she cannot control. Her thoughts become blurry at the edges, slipping from her grasp. She fights it, shaking her head, blinking hard, whispering her own name to anchor herself. Stay awake. Stay awake. She presses her nails into her palm until the pain ignites sharp and clear, using it to pull herself away from the fog creeping into her mind. Another cramp seizes her belly, and she gasps, her breath hitching, fear igniting again. She knows she cannot survive this for much longer. The cold, the blood, the shock, the strain on her body, it all stacks against her, relentless and inexorable. The mountain doesn't care how hard she fights. The mountain will win if no one intervenes. She screams again. And this time, the sound feels different, pushed out with a desperation so raw it surprises even her. The returning echo seems to linger a fraction longer, bouncing off the rock wall before fading. Her heart leaps at the slightest hint of possibility. She pauses, listening. Every nerve on edge. For a moment there is nothing, and desperation slams back down on her. Then, faintly, in the distance, she hears something else. Not a voice, not footsteps. A low, rumbling sound that doesn't belong to the wind. Her breath catches. She strains to listen, afraid to hope, afraid to be wrong. The sound comes again, still far away, still muffled by the fog and distance, but unmistakably mechanical. An engine. Her pulse quickens. Hope and terror collide in her chest. She screams again, pouring everything she has into the sound, directing it toward where she thinks the noise might be coming from. "Help me!" The words tear her throat, but she doesn't care. She will destroy her voice if it means being heard. The rumble gets a little louder. Then it fades. Then it returns, uneven, as if moving along a winding path. She can't tell if it's getting closer or moving away. Panic floods her, and she screams again. Tears stream down her face. Her body shakes with the effort. She waves one arm weakly, even though she knows no one can see her through the fog, even though the movement causes a stabbing pain in her shoulder. She does it anyway, because doing nothing feels like giving up. The engine sound changes again, louder this time, closer, and her heart beats so hard it feels like it will explode. She screams until her vision blurs, until her lungs burn, until the sound breaks into ragged gasps. She listens, holding her breath, and hears it once more, closer now, more distinct. It's not a car. It's rougher, sharper, the sound of something powerful cutting through the silence. She doesn't know who it belongs to. She doesn't know if they will stop. She only knows this could be her last chance. Her strength is draining rapidly. The adrenaline that had carried her this far is beginning to fade. Her head falls forward, chin toward her chest, and she struggles to lift it again, terrified of losing consciousness now, of missing the moment when she needs to scream loudest. She takes another breath and lets out another cry, raw and desperate, sending it upward. With all she has left, the sound echoes back to her, but beneath it, unmistakable now, is the roar of engines on the road above, closer than before. Relief floods her so suddenly it makes her sob. She clings to that sound, focusing on it, letting it anchor her as the darkness presses in. She doesn't know if they will hear her. She doesn't know if they will stop. All she can do is keep making noise, keep fighting, keep believing that the mountain hasn't won yet. The sound grows from a distant vibration to something solid and unmistakable, a deep mechanical growl that pierces the fog and settles into the bones of the mountain. It comes in uneven bursts at first, rising and falling as if testing the road. Then it stabilizes into a rhythm that makes her heart race. She lifts her head with effort, blinking against the blurred vision, and screams again, forcing the sound out despite the burning pain in her throat. "Help me!" The word breaks, but she repeats it, shaping it with all she has left, directing it upward toward the road she cannot see. Above her, the engines slow down, tires crunch over the gravel. A beam of headlight cuts through the fog, then another, bright white cones of light slicing the asphalt and spilling over the edge. The roar drops to a lower idle. Now she hears voices, muffled but human, sharp with alertness, not panic, not confusion. Just the sound that almost makes her cry with relief. On the road, two motorcycles are leaned toward the precipice, their engines still running, headlights shining into the fog. The bikers remain astride them for a moment, helmets tilted toward the edge, listening. Another scream rises from below, hoarse but urgent, and both bikers tense at once. One puts his leg down and kills his engine. The sudden silence feels heavy. The other kills his engine a second later. The silence is broken only by the wind and the faint echo of her voice. They approach the edge, boots scraping the wet asphalt, bodies leaning forward as they stare into the fog. A flashlight beam snaps on, steady and controlled, sweeping downward until it stops on twisted metal halfway down the slope. A wheelchair, bent and broken, wedged against the rock. The sight is enough for both men to exchange a sharp look. This is no accident. This is not a slip. The light moves again, lower, slower, until it finds her. She lies on a narrow stone ledge, pale and trembling, one arm wrapped around her belly, the other raised weakly, as if she could reach the road through willpower alone. Blood darkens her clothes in patches. Her face is streaked with tears. When the beam touches her, she flinches, then sobs, the sound raw and uncontrollable. She screams again, the word torn and desperate. "Help me!" The biker closest to the edge, Jax, swears under his breath. Not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp exhale of anger. He kneels and angles the flashlight, catching details with fast, practiced movements. The position of her body, the distance from the road, the broken chair above and below her. He doesn't ask how she fell. He already knows. The other biker, Big Bear, steps back and scans the road behind them, his eyes cutting through the fog, looking for approaching vehicles, looking for anyone who might still be nearby. The road remains empty. No headlights, no movement, only bond, damp silence. Jax looks at Big Bear and says clearly that she's alive, she's pregnant, and she's hurt. He says it with certainty, not panic, and this steadies the moment. Below them, Sarah watches the light move, the shapes above resolving into two figures against the gray, and hope surges so fast it makes her dizzy. She tries to speak, to explain, to tell them what happened. But the words tangle in her throat. All she can manage is a broken plea, a rush of sound that barely forms sentences. "He pushed me. The chair. Please." Her voice fades into a sob. Jax raises a hand, palm open, a clear signal for her to slow down, to breathe. He tells her he hears her, that she's not alone, that help is here. His voice is firm, even, the kind of voice that expects to be obeyed. She clings to it, letting it anchor her as her body shakes. He asks if she can move her fingers and toes. She tries. Her fingers move. Her toes do not. Panic flares up again, sharp and immediate, but he interrupts it gently, telling her not to move, telling her to stay still. He asks where it hurts most. She presses her hand against her belly, then against her legs, shaking her head. He nods as if this confirms something important. Big Bear returns to the edge with a coil of rope already in his hands, movements efficient and unhurried. He doesn't waste time asking permission. He anchors the rope around a sturdy rock outcropping and tests it with his weight. Then he signals his partner. They exchange a few quick, low, and precise words about the support, the ledge, the safest angle of descent. There is no hesitation. Big Bear clips himself in and swings a leg over the edge, his boots finding purchase in the rock as he lowers himself. The rope slides through his hands in controlled increments. Above, Jax keeps the rope taut, eyes fixed on the descent, body braced. The flashlight beam follows him, steady, illuminating the narrow path as he gets closer to her. When he reaches the ledge, he sets his feet carefully and kneels beside her, keeping his weight low. And centered, he introduces himself, just Bear, his tone calm. He tells her not to look down. He tells her to keep breathing. He asks permission before touching her, waiting for her nod. Then he gently checks her shoulder, her back, her legs, moving slowly, explaining each step. He feels the unnatural angle of her leg and curses softly. Then he stops, immobilizing her with expert care. He checks her pulse, steady but fast. He watches her breathing, puts his hand over hers on her belly, and asks if the baby is moving. She nods weakly, tears flowing again. Relief and fear intertwined. He tells her that's good, that it matters, that they are going to keep her safe. Above them, Jax has already called for backup, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice clear as he gives their location, describing the fall, the fog, the pregnant woman trapped on a ledge. He doesn't embellish, doesn't shout. He says what is necessary and nothing more. He hangs up the call and returns to the rope. Ready. Below, Bear wraps a jacket around her shoulders, tucking it tight to keep the heat in. Then he positions his arm and her head to prevent extra strain. He tells her she did the right thing by screaming. That sound carries here, that's the reason they stopped. The words make her sob harder, the relief breaking through the terror finally. She clings to his sleeve with trembling fingers, afraid to let go, afraid this might disappear like a dream. He tells her he's not going anywhere. He tells her they're going to lift her up slowly, carefully, that she needs to stay as still as possible. He secures the harness around her torso, checking each strap twice, adjusting for her belly, explaining what he's doing so nothing surprises her. When the signal comes from above, he tightens his grip on the rope and braces himself. The ascent begins inch by inch, the rope taut, the harness holding. She gasps as the movement pulls at her injuries, but he keeps a steady hand on her shoulder, another guiding the rope, talking to her the whole time, counting breaths, telling her when to expect pressure. The ledge disappears beneath her feet. The fog swirls, thick and disorienting, but the light from above remains fixed, a beacon she refuses to look away from. The pull continues, slow and relentless, until hands reach down from the road and grip the harness, strong and secure. She is lifted over the edge and onto the asphalt, placed carefully on her side, wrapped in jackets, shielded from the drop she no longer has to see. The engines remain silent. The fog closes around them. One rider kneels beside her, checking her again, while the other scouts the road, alert and vigilant. She clings to consciousness, to the sound of their voices, to the knowledge that she was heard. The mountain didn't erase her. The scream found the right ears. The cold asphalt presses against her cheek as they place her fully on the road, the surface rough and damp. Smelling of oil and fog, she gasps as the movement sends pain through her back and legs. But the hands are already there, firm and deliberate, preventing her from rolling, keeping her aligned. Bear kneels close, his voice low and controlled, telling her to breathe with him, slow and shallow, counting out loud so she can follow. Another jacket is placed over the first, thick and heavy, trapping heat against her shivering body. The fog swirls around them, muffling the world. But the road feels solid beneath her now, real in a way the ledge never did. She clutches the fabric near his chest, fingers numb and clumsy, terrified that if she lets go, she might slide back into nothingness. Bear gently pries her hand open and replaces her grip with a firm hold on his sleeve, anchoring her. He tells her she's safe for now, that he's not going anywhere, that help is on the way. The words sink in slowly, breaking through the shock and pain. But they matter. They keep her present. They move with practiced efficiency. No rush, no hesitation. Jax checks her airway, tilting her head just enough to keep it clear without straining her neck. Bear presses 2 fingers against her wrist and counts silently, eyes sharp, noting the speed and strength of her pulse. It's fast, too fast, but steady. He nods once. He asks if she can hear him. She nods back, tears sliding through her hair. He asks her name. She gives it, her voice thin and raspy, barely louder than the fog. He repeats it back to her, anchoring her. Then he asks how many months along she is. She answers between breaths. His expression tightens for a moment, then relaxes again. He tells her to keep a hand on her belly and to tell him if the baby moves. She does as she's told, terrified of what she might feel, or not feel. But then relief floods her as a faint movement responds to her touch. She sobs, the sound breaking loose now that she knows that part of her is still alive. They improvise a splint for her leg, careful not to straighten it, padding it with folded jackets and securing it in place with belts and straps. Each adjustment brings a new spike of pain, sharp and nauseating, and she screams despite trying not to. Bear tells her it's okay to make noise, that the pain is information. It helps them know where to be careful. He tells her exactly what he's going to do before he does it, never surprising her, never moving without warning. When he gently presses her abdomen to evaluate tenderness, he watches her face closely. He stops immediately when she gasps and assures her he won't touch there again unless absolutely necessary. He keeps his hand near hers instead, a constant presence she clings to. Another contraction seizes her without warning, a deep squeeze that steals her breath and makes her arch slightly despite the pain. She cries out, clutching her belly, panic rising as the fear threatens to overwhelm her again. Bear notices instantly. He asks when the last one was, how long it lasted, how it felt compared to the one before. She struggles to answer, words tangled in the pain, but he listens patiently, putting the pieces together. He tells her that stress and trauma can cause contractions, that it doesn't mean she's in labor yet, that right now the most important thing is to keep her still and warm. He instructs her to take short breaths with him until the wave passes. She follows his voice, focusing on the rhythm, and after a long, agonizing moment, the pressure yields. She slumps back against the road, exhausted, chest heaving. Above them, a phone buzzes briefly, then goes silent as Jax finishes another call. His voice is quiet and precise as he confirms their location again and describes her condition. He returns to her side and crouches down, scanning the road through the fog, alert for approaching headlights or flashing lights. The fog makes everything feel isolated, as if the world beyond this small circle has ceased to exist, but the men don't lower their guard. Big Bear stands a few yards up the road, his flashlight sweeping in slow arcs, making sure no vehicle comes too fast around the curve. Jax remains with her, never leaving her field of vision. Her body begins to shake harder. The adrenaline that had carried her through the rescue drains away, leaving weakness and cold. Her teeth chatter uncontrollably. Jax notices and adds another layer, tucking it around her legs and shoulders, sealing in the heat as best he can. He tells her to keep talking, even if it's just to answer simple questions, because staying awake matters. He asks what day it is. She responds, hesitating, then correcting herself. He smiles faintly and tells her she did well. He asks her to squeeze his fingers. She does, weakly, but enough. He tells her that's good. It tells him her nerves are still responding. She nods, clinging to these small victories. The pain blooms again in her shoulder, a deep throb that pulses with every heartbeat. He checks it carefully, feeling gently, and tells her it might be dislocated or fractured, but it can wait. He reminds her that moving it now could make things worse. She nods, closing her eyes briefly before forcing them open again, terrified of falling into the dark. He notices and tells her to keep her eyes on him, to focus on his voice, to stay here. She does. She counts his words. She clings to the sound of the engine still idling nearby, a faint reassurance that they are no longer alone. Another contraction hits, weaker this time, but still terrifying. And she moans, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. Bear keeps time, murmuring the seconds under his breath, and nods when it passes. He tells her it's easing up, that the pattern matters, that help will be here soon. She asks when, her voice trembling. He answers honestly, saying he can't promise minutes, but that the response teams are on their way, and she's stable for now. The honesty calms her more than any false reassurance could. She nods and grips his sleeve again. The fog begins to glow faintly as distant lights approach, diffuse and soft at first, then clearer, flashing rhythmically through the gray. Relief floods her so powerfully it makes her dizzy. She laughs weakly, then sobs again, overwhelmed by the realization that this is real, that they won't leave her here. The men respond instantly, waving lights, signaling, guiding the approaching vehicles safely toward them. The road fills with sound again, radios crackling, doors opening, boots on asphalt. Hands replace hands, careful and coordinated. But Bear, the man who stayed with her, doesn't leave until the last possible moment. He squeezes her shoulder gently and tells her she did everything right, that screaming saved her life. She tries to thank him, but the words tangle and break. He nods anyway, as if he understands. As the response teams take over, securing her to a stretcher, immobilizing her completely, she feels the fear recede enough for exhaustion to take its place. The pain is still there, sharp and relentless, but it no longer feels like the end. As they lift her, she looks back once through the fog at the dark edge of the road where it all began. Then she closes her eyes and focuses on her breathing, on the firm hands holding her, on the knowledge that she is no longer alone, that the night did not take her, that she and the child inside her have been given another chance to survive. The hospital lights are too bright, a harsh white that strips the color from everything and makes time feel artificial. But she clings to their constancy as the stretcher wheels carry her through sliding doors and into a controlled order. Voices overlap with practiced calm. Names and numbers are exchanged. Vitals are announced. Monitors are connected with fast hands. The beep of a heart monitor anchors her, a steady rhythm that pulls her attention away from the pain long enough to breathe. A nurse asks her name, and she responds, then responds again when asked, grateful that her voice still works. Another question about how far along she is, if she felt movement after the fall, if she's bleeding now. She answers each question between shallow breaths, gripping the edge of the stretcher when a contraction intensifies, and then relaxes. They move her carefully, immobilizing her neck, stabilizing her leg without forcing it straight, explaining each step before it happens. She feels the weight of competence settle over her like a blanket. In the trauma room, the curtains close, and the world shrinks to gloved hands and measured orders. An ultrasound probe presses gently against her abdomen, and the room holds its breath. The sound of a fetal heartbeat fills the space, fast but strong. The relief hits her so hard, she sobs. Tears spring fast and uncontrollable. A doctor tells her the baby is alive, that they will keep monitoring, that right now the goal is stability. She nods, repeating the words silently as if to make them permanent. The pain medication is adjusted carefully, enough to ease the ache without masking critical signs. She feels the pain recede slightly, replaced by a heavy awareness of her body, bruised and shaking. But even here, time passes in strange increments as scans are completed and results are reviewed. X-rays confirm fractures in her leg, painful but contained. Her shoulder is injured, but not life-threatening. Blood tests show stress and loss, but not enough to overwhelm. The contractions come and go, irregular, tracked on a screen that rises and falls with each wave. A doctor explains that trauma can trigger them, that rest and monitoring are essential, that it's too early to call this labor. The explanation is quiet and precise, and she clings to it. She is moved to a quieter room, still under watch, still tethered to machines that hum softly. The fog of shock begins to clear, and with it comes the weight of memory, the push, the silence, the way the road emptied as if it had decided she didn't matter. Her chest tightens, and she turns her face to the pillow, breathing through the surge of emotion until it passes. A knock sounds, and a uniformed officer enters, followed by another. They don't rush. They introduce themselves and ask if she can speak. A nurse stays by her side, nodding with reassurance. She agrees. The officer asks her to tell them what happened, starting from when they stopped on the mountain road. Her voice trembles at first. Then it steadies as she speaks. She describes the fog, the edge, the hands on the wheelchair, the moment the wheels tipped. She says his name, Mark. She says the other woman was there, watching. She says there was no argument, no loss of control, just a push and the sound of metal falling. The officer listened without interrupting, writing carefully, looking up only to clarify details. He asks if anyone tried to help after the fall. She responds no. He asks if she believes the fall was accidental. She responds clearly that it was not. The words feel heavy and necessary. When she finishes, her hands tremble, but she feels lighter, as if something poisonous has been drained. The officer thanks her and explains the next steps in simple language. A report will be filed. The scene has been secured. Witnesses have been identified. He tells her that leaving someone injured without calling for help is a felony, and that pushing a person in a wheelchair off a road is worse. He doesn't promise results. He promises a process. She nods, appreciating the honesty. As they leave, another figure appears in the doorway. One of the bikers is there, helmet under his arm, eyes careful, respectful. He asks if she's okay. She tells him she's alive. He smiles faintly and says that matters. An officer speaks with him quietly in the hall, then with the second biker, collecting names, times, positions. They sign statements describing the broken chair, the angle of the slope, the sound of her voice in the fog. They describe stopping because the scream didn't sound like an accident. The officers take note. Alone again, she stares at the ceiling and lets reality settle. She is safe for now. The baby is alive. The truth has been told to a system built to hold it. Fear still coils in her stomach, but it is joined by something new, a thin thread of determination. A nurse returns and adjusts her blankets. She checks the monitor, noting the pattern of contractions easing up. She asks if she needs anything. Sarah asks for water. The nurse smiles and brings her crushed ice instead, explaining gently. She accepts it, grateful for the small kindnesses. They bring her phone, cracked but working. Messages pile up from numbers she recognizes, and some she doesn't. She doesn't open them yet. She isn't ready for voices that might drag her backward. Later, a doctor returns with updates and a plan. Overnight monitoring, orthopedic consultation in the morning, obstetrics under continuous watch, pain management adjusted as needed. She listens and asks questions, her voice firmer now. The doctor answers each one. When the room becomes quiet again, she closes her eyes and breathes. The beep continues. The lights hum. The hospital holds her. She thinks of the fog eventually lifting, of the daylight revealing the road as it truly is. She thinks of the push and the choice that followed it. She thinks of the cry and the way it traveled to the right ears. The thought reassures her. She hasn't been erased. She has been documented. She is alive. The morning arrives without sunlight, filtered through the hospital blinds and the low hum of machines. And with it comes the next phase of what happened on the mountain. The calm of the room contrasts sharply with the pressure building elsewhere, where decisions are being made and stories are being tested. She wakes to a nurse adjusting a monitor and a soft greeting, then to the familiar ache in her leg and shoulder. Pain controlled but present, a reminder that the night was real. Her phone vibrates again, this time with missed calls from unknown numbers, and she leaves it untouched, choosing instead to focus on the steady rhythm of the fetal monitor down the hall. Officers move with determination, carrying folders, exchanging short sentences, their voices low but urgent. The night's report has triggered a chain of actions that do not pause for convenience. On the mountain road, investigators arrive in a fog that still clings stubbornly to the asphalt, documenting tire tracks, measuring the distance from the edge to the ledge, photographing the broken wheelchair wedged against the stone. They note the lack of a safety rail, the absence of skid marks consistent with an accident, the angle that makes a self-slide implausible. A flashlight beam traces the chair's grips, smudges where pressure was applied, and the timeline is reconstructed minute by minute. Cameras from nearby stretches of road are obtained, grainy footage showing a car stopping briefly, then driving away with no hazard lights, no call made. Cell phone data is requested and cross-referenced. Pings align too perfectly with the window of the fall. The story the husband and the other woman begin to tell is careful at first, rehearsed, framed in confusion and panic, centered around a supposed slip and a tragic error in judgment. They say the fog was thick. They say it happened fast. They say they thought she had fallen, and that there was nothing they could do. The words sound reasonable until placed alongside the facts. In a quiet interrogation room, Tiffany sits rigid, hands folded, eyes darting to the clock. Her phone sits on the table, face down. She answers questions with a clipped precision, repeating phrases that seem memorized. She says she was a few steps away. She says she didn't see the exact moment. She says she was in shock. When asked why an emergency call wasn't made, she says she panicked. When asked why the car left the scene, she says the husband insisted they seek help elsewhere. The investigator nods, takes notes, asks again, slower this time, about the distance to the nearest turnout, about the signal strength, about the choice to drive past the last point of reception. Her answers begin to drift. The rhythm falters. She glances at the phone. The investigator asks to see it. She hesitates, then slides it across the table. A search history appears, brief but incriminating. Questions about accidents and liability, about falls and responsibility. The investigator doesn't comment. He simply notes the timestamps. In a separate room, Mark paces. He talks more. He fills the silence with explanations. He insists he loved his wife. He insists there was no intent. He says the wheelchair rolled, that he tried to grab it, that the fog made it impossible to judge the depth. The investigator listens, and then asks him to demonstrate the movement with a model chair placed between them. Mark's hands move forward in the demonstration, applying pressure in a way that contradicts his words. The investigator asks him to repeat it, slower. The second attempt looks the same. The investigator thanks him and ends the demonstration. Outside the room, an officer shares the statements from the two bikers. Consistent, calm, precise. They describe hearing a scream that didn't sound like an accident, stopping because something was wrong, seeing the broken chair above and below, finding a pregnant woman alive on a ledge. They describe the absence of any other person on the road. Their timelines match the camera footage. The pieces begin to fit. In the hospital, she is asked if she can answer some follow-up questions. A nurse stays with her, a doctor nearby, and the officer speaks softly, clarifying details, confirming names, confirming positions. She answers without embellishment, choosing precision over emotion even while her hands shake. She describes the lack of argument, the calm, the push. She states clearly that the other woman watched and didn't intervene. The officer nods and thanks her, explaining that consistency matters, that her account aligns with the evidence already gathered. The words bring a strange relief, not joy, but validation. She is not alone in what she knows. By the afternoon, the pressure reaches the couple. Tiffany asks for a lawyer. Mark asks to change his statement. The investigator allows it, noting the request. The revised version introduces new contradictions, new explanations that clash with previous claims. The process is methodical, patient, relentless. A prosecutor is informed. Charges are discussed. Language is chosen carefully to reflect intent and omission. Leaving the scene. Failure to render aid. Aggravated assault with a deadly act. The terms are harsh but precise. Arrest warrants are prepared. As the officers set out to execute them, the fog on the mountain has finally cleared, revealing the road in full daylight. The edge is unforgiving and clear. She rests between updates, drifting in and out of consciousness, waking to the sound of her name and the reassuring presence of the staff. A social worker introduces herself, explains resources, explains protection, explains that safety planning will be part of the days ahead. She listens and nods, absorbing what she can. The baby moves again, a small insistence, and she presses her hand to her belly, anchoring herself in that fact. Late in the day, an officer returns with an update delivered without fanfare. Both suspects have been taken into custody. The investigation is ongoing. She will be kept informed. The words settle slowly, bringing neither triumph nor closure, but a measure of stability. As evening approaches, the room becomes quieter. The machines continue their measured sounds. She thinks of the mountain road under a clear sky, of how different it must look now, exposed and undeniable. She thinks of the stories that tried to form and failed under scrutiny. She thinks of the scream that carried, the witnesses who stopped, the record that now exists. The night didn't erase her. The morning didn't soften the truth. It sharpened it. The room chosen for the confrontation is small and deliberately simple, designed to remove distractions and leave only words and reactions. Fluorescent lights hum softly overhead, casting an even glow that reveals every micro-movement. Sarah is not physically present, still recovering in the hospital, but her presence fills the space through recorded statements, timelines, and evidence. Laid out in careful order, the investigator begins by reviewing facts, not accusations, anchoring the conversation in time and place. The mountain road, the fog, the wheelchair, the fall. The timeline is shown clearly, minute by minute, with camera images showing the car stopping and leaving. Cell data matches the absence of any emergency call. Tiffany sits across the table, hands tightly clasped, eyes fixed on a point just beyond the investigator's shoulder. Her breathing is shallow. She nods when facts are stated, as if agreement might soften their weight. When asked to explain again why she didn't intervene, her voice trembles. She repeats the word panic. The investigator asks what kind of panic prevents someone from calling for help. The silence stretches. She swallows and says she froze. The investigator plays a short clip from the bikers' statements, their calm voices describing what they saw and heard. The contrast is stark, and Tiffany's composure cracks. Her answers begin to drift, sentences trailing off, details shifting. The investigator pauses, then asks a single question about her position relative to the wheelchair at the moment it tipped. She answers once, then answers differently when the question is rephrased. The inconsistency hangs in the air. In a nearby room, Mark sits rigidly, jaw tight, eyes darting to the door as if expecting rescue. He insists on speaking, filling the space with explanations that overlap and clash. He claims the chair rolled. He claims he tried to stop it. The investigator asks him to slow down and focuses on the details. Where were your hands? In what direction did they move? How much force did you apply? Mark demonstrates again with the model chair. The movement is unmistakable. Forward pressure. Both hands. The investigator doesn't argue. He simply places a still image from the road camera next to the demonstration, showing the same posture, the same position. Mark's words falter. He shifts tactics, suggesting the fog distorted the depth, that fear overcame him. The investigator acknowledges the fear, but asks why the car left without lights, without a call, without returning. Mark has no answer that holds. The two are brought into the same space, sitting across from each other, separated by the table that now supports the weight of the proof. The investigator explains the purpose clearly. This is not a debate. It's an opportunity to reconcile statements with evidence. Tiffany looks at Mark, searching his face for guidance. He avoids her eyes. The investigator asks Tiffany to describe the moment again, from the stop to the departure. She starts with confidence, then stumbles as the timeline tightens. The investigator asks Mark to confirm her version. He hesitates, then contradicts her without realizing it. The room becomes tense. The investigator remains calm, letting the contradictions speak for themselves. He asks about the search history found on Tiffany's phone. She denies intent, claims curiosity, claims fear. The investigator asks why those searches occurred minutes after the fall. Her shoulders slump. She begins to cry, not loudly, but with short, shallow breaths that signal a collapse. She says she didn't think anyone would hear. The words fall with finality. The investigator stops the recording and explains the consequences in clear terms. Joint liability, active participation, failure to render aid. The language is precise, devoid of drama. Tiffany asks if telling the truth will help. The investigator responds honestly that the truth matters. It affects charges and outcomes, but it cannot erase what happened. She nods, tears streaking her face, and looks at Mark again. He finally looks back, and in that gaze, the alliance fractures. She begins to speak, hesitant at first, then faster. She admits she was there. She admits she saw the push. She admits she told him to leave. Mark interrupts, raising his voice, denying her words, accusing her of lying to save herself. The investigator raises a hand and restores order. He asks Mark if he wishes to respond. The breathing is loud in the small room. Later, the investigator meets briefly with the prosecutor, presenting the developments without comment. The decision is swift. Charges proceed. Custody continues. Back at the hospital, Sarah is gently informed that the statements have been reconciled, that admissions were made, that the case has strengthened. She listens, absorbing the information with a calm she didn't expect to feel. It doesn't bring her relief exactly, but it brings her clarity. The narrative that tried to bury her has unraveled under the light. She thanks the officer in a low voice. After the call ends, she rests her hand on her belly and breathes, feeling the constant movement that reminds her why she endured. The confrontation has passed. The truth stands where the fog once hid it. The consequences arrive in silence at first, not with sirens or shouts, but with paperwork, schedules, and the slow adjustment of a system that does not forget. Charges are filed with precise language. Each charge reflects a choice that cannot be undone. Mark is processed without ceremony and placed in a cell where the hours stretch out and explanations lose their power. Tiffany is detained separately. Her statement is now part of the record, her admission a weight she cannot put down. Lawyers come and go, advising caution, reshaping strategies. But the facts do not bend. Evidence piles up in neat folders, photographs of the road in daylight, measurements of the drop, transcripts of calls that were never made. The broken wheelchair becomes an exhibit, its twisted frame tagged and photographed from every angle. The biker's statements are read over and over, firm and consistent, anchoring the timeline. The mountain road is no longer a place of fog and chance. It is a documented scene. Outside the courthouse, attention grows. A brief notice appears online, then another. A headline names the incident and the charges. Careful not to speculate, careful not to sensationalize. But the impact is immediate. Commentators argue over words, but the core remains unchanged. A pregnant woman in a wheelchair was pushed from a road and left without help. Witnesses intervened. Suspects were detained. Public response is swift and divided, sympathy and indignation intertwined, but the legal process moves at its own pace, indifferent to the noise. Protection orders are issued, assets are reviewed, access is restricted. Mark's attempts to communicate are blocked. Tiffany's messages go unanswered. Silence, once a weapon, becomes a boundary enforced by law. In the hospital, Sarah receives updates filtered through professionals, trained to deliver facts without cruelty. A social worker explains safety measures and future steps, outlining what protection looks like in practice. A nurse adjusts a monitor and asks how she slept. A doctor reviews scans and assures her that progress is steady. The baby's heartbeat remains strong, a constant reassurance that steadies her when her thoughts wander. She listens, asks questions, and signs forms. Her hand is steady despite the tremor that sometimes returns. Pain appears and recedes, managed carefully. The room becomes a place of recovery rather than crisis. She begins physical therapy for her leg, small, measured, and deliberate movements, each a reminder of how far she has come from the edge. The legal consequences deepen. Bail is denied. Arraignments are scheduled. Dates appear on calendars. Mark's employment status changes overnight. Privileges revoked. Accounts frozen, pending review. Friends distance themselves. Statements are issued and retracted. Tiffany faces charges that carry real weight, not symbolic reprimands. She learns the meaning of joint responsibility in a system that records everything. Every decision is documented. every delay explained. The machinery of accountability moves forward, slow and thorough. Sarah is asked if she wishes to make a short statement for the record, not to the public, but to the court. She considers it carefully. When she speaks, her words are simple and exact. She describes the push and the absence of help. She describes the fear and the when. She describes the scream and the moment it was answered. She doesn't embellish. She doesn't accuse beyond what she knows. The statement is entered and sealed. It becomes part of a file that will travel through rooms and hands she will never see. The act of speaking leaves her tired, but quiet. The truth now has a place to live. She learns to navigate hospital corridors with help, to manage the stiffness that greets her each morning, to rest without guilt. She meets briefly with the bikers again, a short visit coordinated by officials. Gratitude is exchanged without ceremony. There is no grand speech, just a nod, a handshake, a shared understanding that the right thing was done at the right time. They leave as they arrived, without seeking attention. The court calendar moves forward. Motions are filed and argued. A judge reviews the evidence and affirms the seriousness of the charges. The language is formal and unwavering. Responsibility is not diluted. The absence of a distress call weighs heavily. The decision to leave the scene is named for what it is. Consequences stick to names and actions, not to fog or chance. The mountain is not accused, the people are. At night, when the room falls silent and the monitors hum softly, she thinks of the road under a clear sky. How ordinary it must look to passers-by now. She thinks of the moment when silence could have ended everything, and the moment when sound changed the outcome. The knowledge doesn't bring comfort exactly, but it brings firmness. She presses her hand to her belly and feels movement, small and insistent. A reminder that life continues forward even when it has been pushed back. The chapter closes not with revenge, but with consequence. The system holds. The record remains. Decisions made on a foggy road have names and dates attached now. She rests within the bounds of care and the law, no longer alone, no longer erased. The price is being paid, not in spectacle, but in accountability. And that, finally, is enough to let her breathe. The final weeks move with a constancy she didn't expect, each day marked by small gains and careful plans rather than fear. She leaves the hospital with instructions folded neatly in a folder, a splint properly fitted, appointments scheduled in clear handwriting. The air outside feels different, open and real, and she pauses before the doors close behind her, breathing as if to confirm that the world has weight and warmth again. Recovery isn't dramatic. It's measured in steps assisted by a therapist, in stretches that sting and then relieve, in nights when sleep comes in short, honest chunks. The baby's heartbeat stays strong at every checkup, a sound that steadies her more than any reassurance. She learns to trust it, to let it anchor her when memories surge without warning. The legal process continues without spectacle. Hearings happen on time. Motions are argued and resolved. The language is precise and careful, designed to endure. She attends when advised, supported by professionals who explain each step and prepare her for what she will hear. She listens while the facts are read aloud, the mountain road described without fog, the wheelchair identified by serial number, the absence of a call named clearly. The courtroom is quiet and procedural, and she feels no surge of triumph, only a firm sense that reality has been restored to the record. When the judge speaks, the words have weight without drama. Responsibility is affirmed. The path forward is set. The process does what it promised to do. Outside the court, she avoids the noise. She declines interviews. She chooses privacy not as a retreat, but as a protection. The story belongs now to the file, the evidence, and the timeline. At home, she builds a routine that supports healing. Meals are simple and regular. Exercises are completed with care. Rest is treated as work. Friends visit in small groups, offering presence instead of questions. She accepts help without apology. She learns that strength can be quiet. One afternoon, she receives a brief note forwarded through official channels. It's not an apology. It's a curt, sober acknowledgement, confirming the choice to accept responsibility. She reads it once and sets it aside. Closure, she understands, isn't delivered by words. It's built with safety and time. She doesn't need to respond. As her due date approaches, anticipation replaces dread. Preparations are practical and focused. A crib assembled, clothes folded, a bag packed and unpacked. At appointments, doctors speak with cautious optimism, explaining plans and contingencies. She asks questions and listens intently, grateful for the clarity. When anxiety rises, she returns to breathing, to counting, to the constant fact of movement under her hand. The baby responds, insistent and alive. The night labor begins is nondescript and perfect in its normalcy. The pain comes in waves that are expected and managed. The room fills with quiet instructions and familiar routines. She focuses on the present moment, on the voice guiding her, on the simple task of breathing through each contraction. There is fear, yes, but it's matched by resolution. When the child arrives, the sound that fills the room is not a scream of terror, but a cry of arrival, strong and undeniable. She cries then, not just out of relief, but out of the recognition of what was saved. Days later, holding her son in a quiet room, she reflects on the thin line that once separated sound from silence. She doesn't dwell on the edge or the fall. She remembers the choice to keep calling, to refuse the silence. She remembers the moment the engines answered. The memory doesn't haunt her. It steadies her. It becomes part of a larger truth about persistence and chance and the importance of being heard. Life resumes at its slow, honest pace. Physical therapy continues. Court dates conclude. Documents are filed and closed. The system completes its work, and the chapter ends where it should. Not with spectacle, but with stability. She walks with assistance, then without it. She laughs more easily. She sleeps more deeply. She builds a future that doesn't revolve around what happened, even as she acknowledges it. On a clear morning months later, she drives along a different road, one with guardrails and open views. She stops briefly at a lookout, steps out carefully, and looks across a valley full of light. The air is fresh. Sound carries. She thinks of the mountain and the fog, and the way voices can travel when given space. She doesn't whisper a thank you. She simply breathes and returns to the car. The story doesn't end with forgetting, but with living. The scream that once pierced the fog becomes a memory of bravery. The record remains exact, the consequences stand, and in the present, a child sleeps, a future unfolds, and the world goes on. Solid and bright, ready to be re-entered. Thank you for joining me until the end of this story. Your time and support mean a lot to this channel. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Tell me in the comments what you thought and what other stories you would like to hear. See you in the next video.